Hi, everyone. Welcome to another week of DEI Talk Live, and this is the extended edition. It is a privilege to share with you from our area of expertise. Of course, we have our I have my lovely co-host with me. All right, so my name is Alison. I am an inclusion strategist, educator, and author, and I am truly passionate about people, passionate about inclusion and sustainability. Hence, we have DEI Talk Live, the extended edition. All right, so I co-host with lovely April and Francine, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves to you. Over to you, Francine and April.
Okay, thank you, Alison. I'm Francine Binns. I am a podcaster of the Balance and Bloom podcast. It's about mental health, all things mental health awareness. I am also a social worker. My focus is on employee assisted programs and how to make better working conditions for everyone.
All right, thank you so much, Francine. And then we have April to share with us.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is April Ogden. I am the CEO and founder of a company called It's Your Outcome, where we bridge the gap between leaders and the diverse professionals that they serve. And we specialize in disability inclusion. And just shameless plug, you can just follow our at It's Your Outcome on all the major platforms.
All right, thank you so much, April, for sharing with us. All right, so this week we're going to be speaking about how we can facilitate persons in the virtual space. All right, and of course, we want to ensure that we make our virtual spaces as inclusive as possible. With regards, we want to facilitate everyone, not just having them feel comfortable working from home, but we are going to share with you ways in which you can accommodate persons, or if you are a potential employer, you can consider ways of facilitating your employees to make them feel more comfortable at work, and of course, comfortable increasing efficiency, productivity in your company. All right. So one of the primary reasons why we decided to share is because, of course, we have been speaking about inclusion, and not just inclusion, but diversity and just employee wellness, employee well-being, facilitating persons who are disabled, neurodiverse, and the list goes on from there. All right. Now, the virtual workspace became more popular. So it was not very popular, but it became increasingly popular, of course, when we had COVID. Okay, so during COVID, basically persons were almost forced to work from home. There was no other alternative, so they had to work directly from home. Now, sad to say that many organizations were not adequately prepared because the remote workspace was just being introduced in, let us say, the smaller companies, right? Smaller companies. So apart from those companies who were focused on remote work, strictly remote work, the other companies, other businesses, they were not adequately prepared for facilitating persons across the virtual space. Okay, and we can relate this even right across, so even education. So I can share my experience from educational perspective. When I facilitated students, taught them from home, it was very uncomfortable for the students. It was very disruptive. Hence, we recognize that a lot had to be done to facilitate students. All right. So this is where the Ministry of Education got even more involved. Students were able to be facilitated in that they had access to devices, etc. And I'll bring this over now, even to the workspaces. All right. So companies actually had to spend, so their budgets increased because they had to spend to facilitate persons working from home. Now, listen, it's very understandable for those who would not have had to facilitate persons working from home. Okay, but the fact that they had to facilitate persons meant that they had to not only get resources for these persons, so in terms of, yes, they needed headsets, they needed, let us say, wireless headsets, etc. Apart from these, it was needed for persons to learn how to adjust in these work environments. Now, some of the challenges that have arisen from these situations, let's say it presents pros and it presents cons. All right. Now, some of the pros were that persons who were actually neurodiverse actually had the comfort of knowing that they were being included in the provisions that were made. And this was because it was now highlighted that these persons had to make it known that they were neurodiverse. So before that, a lot of persons were actually hiding behind the desk. And I speak from research and from also communicating directly with persons. So you find that a lot of persons were hiding behind the desk. They did not have to disclose the fact that they were neurodiverse, etc. Right? Or they were neurodivergent. However, with the increase of the remote workspace, it was necessary that these conditions had to be disclosed up to about, let us say, 70% in my estimation. Okay. So some of the pros were that, yes, so this was highlighted, which meant, of course, more provisions would have been made, and of course, accommodations for persons, especially who were neurodiverse. All right. Persons who were neurotypical, meaning that the persons who were identified as just being okay, the average employee who, could easily adjust, etc. Provisions were made for these persons in terms of them just becoming more flexible. So they learned not only technological skills, but also their soft skills were improved across the virtual spaces. All right. So in a wrap up, just to say that the virtual environment, it's not just allowing employees to work from home, but it is understanding the technicalities involved with working from home. And this means in facilitating persons who are neurodiverse, facilitating all employees. All right. So when we want to think about mothers working from home, fathers working from home, and I smile because I remember that there was a video showing this gentleman. I think he was a news anchor. He was working from home, and it became a big hit on social media when his daughter, who was a toddler, came rushing in his work area. And of course, I think it was either the nanny or his wife who rushed in right after to help to control the child. All right. But just to say that these are some of the things that occur in the workspace. So companies have to be prepared to handle these situations as they arise. All right. So I will now hand over to Francine, and she will share more where facilitating persons in virtual spaces is concerned. All right. Over to you, Francine.
My apologies, technical difficulties this side. Thank
No
you,
problem.
Alison. Thank
Okay.
you, Alison, for that
Great.
introduction. As you rightfully said in your talk, there are things that companies need to be prepared for, as well as employees where remote work is concerned. I know that recently, I believe Amazon is one of the companies that have almost completely um, done away with remote work. I do understand some of the issues that arise for both the company and the employees. However, there should be some prerequisites for remote workers to have in order to succeed in the virtual work environment that would benefit them and the company itself, to make sure that the integrity of the work is being done and the integrity of the company is also being kept. Some of these things are: you need to have reliable technology and internet connection. You need to have self-discipline and time management. So you need to prioritize work time with family time and home time. Because you're working from home, you need to have that level of professionalism that separates the workspace from the home space. And I believe having a prerequisite to see that the employee who is going to be working remotely can meet those qualifications prior to being able to do remote work can help to alleviate some of those things. Having familiarity with like remote tools and flexibility and adaptability to work across time zones. There's also the issue of cybersecurity awareness, such as, there are some remote workers who choose to work in cafes. We need to understand that there are security issues that will arise when you do that, like using public Wi-Fi is really opening yourself up for hacking and things like that. You need to be able to understand how to protect sensitive data of the company and not overlap and download things on your computer that you're working on that could cause a breach in security issues for the company. These things need to be in place in order to have a good remote work partnership between the company and the individual who's working remotely. Now, one of the issues that happens with remote work is that some workers feel isolated and a little bit lonely, which it can be. I know of Go Brunch, which, not promoting this space, but I'm just saying this was a platform created to foster belonging. I use the platform myself sometimes, and I mention this because having a space like that helps to bridge the gap where companies can create office spaces within these virtual communities, and individuals can virtually pop into a colleague's office space and ask them, have a chat, ask about issues that may arise with the job. And it gives them the opportunity to feel less isolated. So there are people who are coming up with different things to help alleviate some of those feelings of loneliness that can occur when you're working from home. That's isolation. There's also the fact that there are some companies who hire global teams. And if you hire global teams, it means that you're working across time zones. Even if you're working within the United States, you are working across time zones. So offering asynchronous work options and flexible scheduling to accommodate team members across different time zones and with varying personal obligations. This helps people to thrive in the remote setting. All right. And then you can, as companies, conduct inclusivity audits, regularly assess and evaluate the remote work tools that are being used, the meeting formats, the workflows, to ensure that they cater to all employees, including those from underrepresented groups. So you collect feedback on inclusivity and then you implement these changes based on the employee input. Now, how do you have inclusive communication practices in a remote work environment? You train managers and team members to use inclusive language in emails, neutral, addressing people in a neutral way, finding out what their pronouns are or how they like to be addressed, looking at the chats and video calls as different ways of communication, rotating leadership roles in team discussions to encourage feedback from quieter members of the team by using, anonymous suggestion forms. These things ensure that everyone feels heard and that communication is not dominated by a few voices. Now, to wrap up, it is my belief that just having the remote work or hybrid option is in and of itself an inclusive practice. And I say this because there are individuals, and I'm sure April will touch on this in her talk, with disabilities who find it extremely difficult just to get into the office, right? There are parents or caregivers who probably would benefit more from being able to work from home to cut down on travel time and being able to see different things. There are people who would like to live in different states or travel and work, and having this remote option helps to do that. So just I say each company should consider if it is at all possible to have remote and virtual options in your workplace, because that having those options are inclusive practices in and of itself, because there are people with different needs that would be met best if they were able to do so. So thank you, Alison, and I hand it over to April.
All right. Thank you, Allison and Francine. That was a lot of great information. So thank you. Always enjoy hearing you both talk on the subject of inclusion in the workplace. So, as a person with a disability myself, I'm going to talk about inclusion remote and how it impacts the person with a disability. So, in 2019, I was given the opportunity to apply for remote work from home. And so, this was before like pre COVID. So, I was so glad because as a person with a disability, there were a lot of things or challenges I were faced with. And so, having that opportunity to work remotely helped me tremendously. But as we talk about inclusion as relates to remote work, I'm going to talk about three things we often hear a lot about, and I'll just expound upon these things. So, we're always talking about policies and leadership styles and accessibility when it comes to inclusion in the workplace, when it comes to remote work, I should say. So, when we start talking about policies, we want to develop these policies for people with disabilities that work remotely that support them in the workplace. So, one thing comes to mind is accommodations. And so, now here in the United States, we're really big on having the right accommodations to help those individuals to perform the essential functions of the job. And so now, if we're going to have accommodations, we need to make sure all managers understand the policies around accommodations. And moreover, the accountability as it relates to making sure that we have these policies in place and that leaders, managers are following these policies. And when they do not, there will be a certain level of accountability. So Another thing is leadership style. When we start managing individuals from a remote perspective, we want to make sure we're being inclusive. And Francine, you talked a little bit about that, like making sure our communication tools are inclusive or accessible for those individuals with disabilities, making sure that we are allowing individuals to have that flexible time as needed. So, a lot of times, people with disabilities, not every time, but there are many times, a percentage where people need to go to the doctor, and having those flexible schedules would be helpful. And then we're going to talk about accessibility in the workplace. And for remote workers, physical accessibility may not be as a big of a deal as if we're in the office. So having accessibility, digital accessibility, having those digital accessibility audits is something we need to be doing anyway, even if we're in the office. But when we're working from home, we need to make sure that we are having digital accessibility audits. How are our tools? Not just do we offer the platform to an individual, not that we offer the assistive technology, but how does the assistive technology communicate with the platform and our communication tools? Is it working well? And we need to have those feedback loops that we can find out from our employees with disabilities how well these things are working together. Now, Francine touched a little bit on it. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it, but there is a switch to work from home to going in the office. And so this is impacting people with disabilities tremendously. And we're really not thinking about, how that is impacting individuals with disabilities. Now there are certain things we have to consider. So if you're one of the companies and you're considering making that switch, that mandate from work from home to now working in the office, we got to consider how it impacts our employees with disabilities. So the flexibility is going to be impacted tremendously. So the commute to work, that's going to be a big, huge difference. And there's a percentage of individuals that do not drive, and so they depend on shared rides or what we call community transportation options put on by a local government. And so this may be a big difference in how long it takes me to get to work and get started. Okay, and then we start talking about accessibility challenges. So when we're in the workplace, when we're working from home, we had the little bit of our own tools, things were accessible. Now we're mandating that we return to the office, and that may not always be, where managers understand we need to have that accessibility set up. And who will be that person to make sure that, okay, if we're returning to the office, that these things are set up properly for the individual. When we start talking about mandating going from work from home to in the office, again, the thing we need to consider is the mental health and well-being. And so I will tell you from my own experience, being in the office is a big difference from working remotely. And this is going to depend on each individual with a disability. But a lot of times in the workplace, inclusion hasn't been promoted. And so you may face the isolation even more in the workplace. And so it's something we got to think about as we're transitioning from home to in the workplace. So these are things that I'm just closing out, but these are things that we have to think about if we're going to work from home and if we're going to mandate that we work in the office, making sure that we have policies set up, making sure that we have inclusive leadership styles, digital accessibility audits, and then we start working in office, making sure that we have the flexibility in place, that make sure that we understand how it's going to impact those with disabilities. And I'm going to turn it on over back to you, Allison.
All right. Okay. And thank you so much, April and Francine, for the expert advice that you have shared as it relates to facilitating inclusive virtual spaces for employers and employees. So as we end this DEI Talk Live extended edition, I know that you will gain a lot of amazing resources from what we have shared. Don't forget to follow our pages so you can, of course, look for our names, follow our pages for more excellent expertise provided. Okay, I know that uh, April is always sharing resources as it relates to facilitating persons who are disabled, and of course, Francine has a podcast that she shares information, and it is focused on employee wellness and of course facilitating employers and employees. And of course on Wednesdays we have the DEI Talk Live, the audio room, so you can join us at 6:30 p.m. on Wednesdays. All right, so thank you so much, and of course we look forward to sharing with you next week on another edition of DEI Talk Live, and we are ending.